Schools Debating Championships 2007. Before the debate begins, the audience are reminded to switch off all mobile phones, pagers, and anything with bells which might disturb the debaters. Should you need to exit or re-enter the room for any reason during the debate, please wait until the end of the speech to do so. The adjudicators for this debate are Mr. Erskine from Australia, Mr. Smart from Scotland, and Mrs. Kulwell from South Africa. The motion for this debate is, this House believes that the government should not place limits on the areas which scientists research. I now call upon the first speaker for the proposition to open the debate. Please welcome Javi Chong.
Adams, do you mind if I move the podium a bit?
Oops, sorry.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're living in an age where we enjoy the luxury of modern scientific technology. However, ladies and gentlemen, we often ignore that the technology that benefits and ensures our convenience and safety the most often tends to be the most shocking and unconventional discoveries of the time where the discovery was made. And as the first speaker of the proposition, I'm here to proudly present to you a motion that this House believes that the government should not place limits on the areas that scientists may research. And before moving on to the main contentions of this debate, let me basically set the parameters of the debate by defining the few key terms of this motion. Now, the government would refer to the official political institutions that governs a nation. And place limits on would refer to put regulations on. An area would refer to the fields of science, while research would refer to academic pursuit of knowledge. Now, ladies and gentlemen, honorable adjudicators, we, the team opposition, the proposition will prove to you as the first argument, which I, the Prime Minister, will argue to you how the governments do not have the right to limit the pursuit of scientific curiosity. And then my second speaker, Ms. Hee-Im, will argue to you of how it hampers the progress of mankind. And we together as a team will prove to you how the government has no right to limit and define people's right to knowledge and how this hampers scientific progress. Now let me move on to my first argument of how the governments do not have a right to limit pursuit of scientific curiosity. Now my point is basically divided to two issues. First, I will prove to you why the state is an unjustifiable actor, no thank you ma'am, who do not have the ability to define such parameters. And second, I will argue to you how it is dangerous to yield the power to define scientific curiosity to the state. Now my main first argument is that the state is an inappropriate actor to set standards for the scientific community. Now ladies and gentlemen, people have the right to question facts and natural phenomena. However, ladies and gentlemen, governments do not have the right nor the ability to define what is ethical nor unethical. And ladies and gentlemen, we have numerous examples from history how the government has created critical flaws that hampered individuals' pursuit of scientific knowledge, and therefore has later hampered the development of the society as a whole. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in medieval Europe, medicine, the pursuit to search medicine was banned. This was basically because the Catholic Church, which was exerting a strong control, believed that the power to control the physical and the mental state of an individual lied to God. And therefore, any attempt to cure any symptoms was regarded as a blasphemy, blasphemy to God, the absolute ruler. Yes, ma'am.
Certain areas of research, such as nuclear research, that threaten international
areas. We believe that the government should rather later control the application process of these areas, and therefore it is a separate issue from this debate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me move on to my own issue. No, thank you, ma'am. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have proven to you how the medieval ages has hampered medical development as a whole because of its religious beliefs. And the crucial example of how this came into the discovery of autopsy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Leonardo da Vinci is famous for his other genius acts, such as first delving into the structure of human body by considering autopsy. However, he must have done his scientific research in secret and had to hide his genius research results in secret. This was because the community itself has forbidden and therefore has hampered the right of people to develop and to save their lives. Now, another example lies with the study of the sky, with the structure of the universe. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is famous that was regarded, that questioning, no thank you ma'am, that the sun might go round around the earth, and therefore the questioning the astronomy was regarded as blasphemy. And we know through the famous example of Galileo Galilei of how he was punished for questioning scientific evidence. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these continue to exist today. Certain ultra-religious regimes, such as the Hamas or Iran, still exert control on the belief of the people. And ladies and gentlemen, I have proven to you through these historical examples how it is dangerous, and the government does not really have an ability to define what is right or wrong, ethical or unethical in the long term. Now, let me move on to my second argument. How it is dangerous for the people to yield the ability to question to the state. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have stated before that people have the right to question. However, by believing that the government has a right to set limits, to set parameters in academic research, people are yielding the basic right to even approach a scientific subject. And they are letting the government define what the people should question or what the people should learn and later believe. Ladies and gentlemen, this, we believe as a proposition, is the first step of yielding control over the mental state of the individual citizens in the society. Thank you, ma'am. Now we believe there is a perfect example in history from the Nazi Germany of how this happened. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Nazi Germany is not only infamous for restricting the discussion of ideas, but is also infamous for trying to exert control over the scientific field. Now, while the Nazi Germans promoted certain fields of science that helped its political ideology, it also discouraged and later even banned certain areas of science that it considered detrimental to its political science ideology or its control of its citizens. And basically, this was the basic step, the first step that led Nazi Germany to only control on certain scientific areas that is today called as eugenics or geopolitics, that was largely manipulated by political agenda to exert control over its citizens. And ladies and gentlemen, we see as a clear example of where the government tries to first interfere by banning or restricting certain scientific activities, that it is the first step of yielding them the control of how people should believe and how people should learn. And ladies and gentlemen, I have first proven to you that government is firstly a very irresponsible and inappropriate actor in defining the people's the scientific pursuit of the people. And second, I have proven to you how this is the first step of a dangerous process that leads people to yield its power to question the state. And my second speaker will later tell you how it hampers scientific progress. And this is what we are proud to propose. Thank you.
8 minutes, 14 seconds. thank the first proposition speaker for her speech. And now to open the case for the opposition, I call upon Monisha Kumar.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Monisha Kumar, the first speaker for the opposition, opposing the motion this House believes that governments should not place limits on areas which scientists may research. The aim of technology is to benefit people, but when the advantages are outweighed by the disadvantages, it loses its purpose and therefore, in certain instances, has to be limited. Before moving on to my substantive case, I would like to rebut some of the points that were brought up by the word proposition. Well, the proposition first stated lots of benefits in medical aspects, in terms of eugenics. But what we as the opposition are stating is while there might be certain benefits, we need limitations in certain areas which are potentially dangerous to the public people. For example, like my partner brought up, in areas of nuclear research where the threat of weaponry might harm the people. No, thank you, ma'am, sir. Might harm the people. It is these areas that we as the opposition wish to focus on. Despite there being benefits, there are still areas which are negative, and this is what the government should have to limit. No, thank you, sir. Then they also mentioned that the governments actually will not be able to make the decisions and might use their own political agendas ahead of the safety of citizens and might make things which they personally want for their own political gains. Well, with our solution today, which I will be telling you of later on in my speech, we have the UNESCO, which decides the actual usage, which actually draws the line, the distinctive line between what is beneficial and what is not. No, thank you, ma'am. Then they also mentioned that later on, firstly, we should not hinder with the initial research, and later on, we can control when application is being implemented. Well, once the plans are made, once the research has been done, once everything except the actual construction has been done, these plans can fall into the wrong hands. And when it is matters of international peace, when it concerns the safety of many people, when it is for the greater good of society, we need to place limitations initially. We do not want these plans falling into the wrong hands where anyone and everyone can actually make use and construct the application. We need to curb it from the beginning. Yes, ma'am.
Society once judged that autopsy was dangerous to society and tried to ban it, but autopsy has brought numerous benefits to society. What would you say about that?
Well, ma'am, as I said before, we are not limiting every single aspect, every single area. No, thank you, ma'am. We're not limiting every single aspect of research, every single area of research. When you talk about autopsy, we're talking about nuclear energy. When there are weapons, when these people can be harmed. No, thank you, ma'am. When these people can be harmed. In these situations, the government, as a local body, should implement these limits, and to decide the distinctive lines, we have the UNESCO, and I will explain about this in my speech. Moving on to our substantive case. Our case line for today is I will be addressing the harms of certain forms of research and the implementation of limits on it. My second speaker, Sneha, will speak on the role of the government in such a circumstance. Now, the basic problem today, we have firstly nuclear research. Nuclear research might be powerful in terms of providing a power source.
Isn't it true that through nuclear research we have gained energy, which has brought a huge progress to mankind?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Which is why we need limitation, not a ban. Today we're talking about limitation. While certain areas of nuclear research, while certain areas of nuclear research, such as when you provide energy, might actually be beneficial, you have areas such as nuclear reactors, centrifugal devices, which are used in the actual building of bombs, and these are harmful to the citizens. This is where we as the opposition wish to draw the distinctive line and place the limits on those aspects which are not beneficial, which are used instead for harms. No, thank you, ma'am. research. In genetic research, you have gene mapping. Now, with the current advances in gene mapping, it is becoming possible to actually predict the lifespans of people. Ladies and gentlemen, think of this. How would you like it if someone was actually able to tell you, you have 5 more years to live? No, that is not the way. This would have an immense psychological impact on the people. They would become non-functional. No, thank you, ma'am. If they actually knew their lifespan, if they actually knew that their death was nearing. This is not what we want. So in certain areas, we need to limit the research. And in case of designer babies is the talk of today. But what is happening? Look at the ethical issues with designer babies. People are playing gods. They are creating what they want in whatever combination they want. Isn't this a very shallow thing to do? The ethical side, no thank you sir. The ethical side of making of designer babies is not something that is very nice. It is very shallow. And last but not least, the fact of stem cell research, which involves cloning. Cloning, I must say, is okay for organ, no thank you sir, is okay in terms of organ duplications where it can save lives. Whereas when you have people replicating humans, ladies and gentlemen, we do not want another Ahmadinejad or an Osama bin Laden running around. No thank you sir. Which moves me on to my second point, which is our solution. Now, at a local and a national level, the best thing that the governments can do is to cut finance to support such projects. In developed countries where most of this research takes place, the scientists rely heavily on the research and development funds that the governments invest. Now, these governments can cut such funds to the scientists in order to ensure that what is being done is, no thank you ma'am, is done for the greater good of society. To decide what should be the distinctive line, as I said before, we will use an international body such as the UNESCO, because the governments, no thank you ma'am, because the governments do not have the scientific knowledge, nor they might prioritize their personal agendas, which is why we do not make it, no thank you sir, we do not make it an international law, but rather an international body which actually decides, no thank you ma'am, which actually decides the distinctive lines. The UNESCO is an international body that brings scientists together for the purpose of international peace, and this is what we are aiming for today. In terms of nuclear research, research for power is different from research for nuclear weapons and bombs, and the UNESCO will be able to make this distinctive line, allowing research for power for the benefit of the society, but not for bombs for their killing. Cloning is okay for organs, but not to keep duplicating people. If people in the country violate this law by finding an illegal source of finance, the government will penalize them. And if the government itself refuses to comply, we will use the status quo because building of nuclear bombs, for example, is not allowed by the NPT, and sanctions will be placed, such as in the case of Iran and North Korea, to prevent this construction of reactors. So, ladies and gentlemen, what have I told you today? I have told you about the harms in certain areas of scientific research which are not good for the greater part of society, which is why we will have to limit them. I also propose a solution to you, because of which we believe that this motion must fall. Thank you.
8 minutes, 6 seconds.
Thank the first opposition speaker for her speech. Now to continue the case for the proposition, I call upon Salki in.
and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition side based the entire case on the fact that governments and international organizations never make mistakes. They're all rational, they know what's best for their people, and therefore they have the right to limit the people's right to pursue knowledge. We say, ladies and gentlemen, that this is an extremely dangerous, irresponsible stance, and we outside our proposition today firmly stand with the motion that governments or international bodies, for that matter, should never place limits on scientific research. So, ladies and gentlemen, my first speaker has proven to you that governments do not have the capability nor the right to place limits on the people's pursuit of knowledge. I, as second speaker, will prove to you how limits have hampered social progress of mankind. But before I move on to my own substantive matter, I'd first like to deal with three major issues that the leader of opposition brought up that bothered me a little. Firstly, I'm going to talk about this idea about how governments can make rational decisions. Then I'll move on to a substantive case on how this idea of dangerous research and why we should limit it. And then I'll move on to this final issue of a counter plan utilising the UNESCO. So firstly, into this issue of that governments can make rational decisions. Now, I offered a point of information at that point. That's clearly through empirical evidence we see that governments have not made rational decisions in the past. I gave you an excellent example of autopsy. In that sense, ladies and gentlemen, back then the government made the rational decision that autopsy is dangerous for social stability. But the fact of the matter is, just a moment, the government made that decision. And just because it's a modern government in the 21st century, it doesn't necessarily mean that governments are perfect. Yes, please.
Yeah, but in our model, the governments are not going to be making the decisions on areas that should be limited. This is the UNESCO. They won't be making decisions on religious beliefs.
But ma'am, then you're agreeing to the motion that governments should not place limits on the areas of scientific research. So, excellent. The opposition is saying that governments aren't capable. Governments make mistakes, so international bodies should do it. That's not negating the motion in any way whatsoever. They have completely agreed to the principles that the first speaker of the proposition brought up. Thank you for that point. But now moving on to the second argument about how certain researches can be dangerous. Now we say, ladies and gentlemen, we stated specifically in our definition that research is the academic pursuit of knowledge. And this is actually quite a different animal when it comes to application. Because when we have research, ladies and gentlemen, it specifically means that you delve into that project. Application is a different measure. When we make moral decisions concerning ethics, ladies and gentlemen, we can research and weigh the issues of whether this has a positive effect or a negative effect, and then make regulations concerning the application. This is what happened with nuclear energy, ladies and gentlemen, which the opposition side naturally brought up for us. Of course, each sciences have two different faces. Nuclear energy has the aspect of nuclear weapons, and we also have the aspect of nuclear energy, which is benefiting 80% of the French population. Now, in this case, ladies and gentlemen, we can do the research, find out what nucleus can do for society, and then make the application procedures. We say, ladies and gentlemen, the proposition has based their case on the application, not on the research, and thus, this is flawed. But ladies and gentlemen, now back to the final counter model of the UNESCO. Now this is preposterous. They never really gave us a proper model. They say that governments shouldn't decide. And she didn't really clarify whether it's the government limiting she's proposing or the UNESCO she's proposing. But the fact of the matter is, often UNESCO and government limits do not meet a standard criteria. The fact is, many oppressive governments, as my first speaker brought up, will not agree to the UNESCO. The fact of the matter is, the UNESCO doesn't have the mandate to decide which country should put what limits on some sort of scientific research, and therefore this point doesn't stand at all. Also, we say that people in UNESCO aren't perfect. They still make the wrong decisions, such as governments can do. They're susceptible to the same wrong decisions, and therefore this point does not stand. But I've now told all the arguments. No, thank you. So now I'd like to move on to my own substantive matter, in this case, of how limiting the pursuit of scientific knowledge has hampered progress of mankind. Now we say, ladies and gentlemen, that society has now and then experienced many quirks concerning scientific progress. We do question science in the moral matter, and even the fact that, sometimes quick progress can be quite scary. But the fact of the matter is, science has brought huge progress to mankind. And I'm going to analyse this in two aspects. Firstly, how it has improved the understanding of mankind itself, the expansion of knowledge and our identity. And secondly, I'll move on to the more practical aspects of how this has saved lives, ladies and gentlemen, which the opposition seems to be so worried about. So firstly, on to the expansion of knowledge. Now, we can never exclude science from the understanding of our own human identity. This has been occurring for years, ladies and gentlemen, starting from when Galileo discovered that that the world is actually round and not flat. And ladies and gentlemen, from this, human beings, by studying the structure of the Earth, the mass immensity of the universe, and the human anatomy, has been able to understand human nature. And by doing so, although there were quirks with such things such as autopsy, as I mentioned beforehand, we have been able to understand ourselves a little bit better. This is what happened, ladies and gentlemen. We have gained a respect for mankind just a moment, and therefore we have expanded our knowledge. The operation is proposing that we limit this expansion of knowledge and understanding of ourselves. Yes?
You made clear that we are talking about technologies that specifically have more disadvantages than advantages. It is necessary to limit these technologies.
I think I've adequately addressed that point, because we say, ladies and gentlemen, that governments cannot decide properly, especially in terms of science, what will really damage society. We can think, ladies and gentlemen, that autopsy would damage society. It's an example I keep on coming back to, because they said they made the decision that it would damage society, but it turned out to be different. Science has brought huge progresses. We have had great leaps forward because of scientific progress. And we say that the government or UNESCO or whatever magical body they come up with, when it's consisted of human beings who have political agendas, they often make mistakes of making the wrong decision. But ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to move on to now the more practical aspect of how it's benefited mankind scientifically. So ladies and gentlemen, we see that the reason why polio is considered a disease that we can easily deal with now, the reason we can solve heart problems, and the reason we can communicate with devices as small as our palms, is specifically because human beings have been brave with the technological steps forward they have taken. And the fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, of course we have had quirks from now and then concerning physical sciences, earth sciences, and life sciences. But this has improved the quality of mankind's life enormously in the course of decades. An excellent example of this would be vaccines. As difficult it may be to imagine right now, there was a time when vaccines was considered to be dangerous. The government tried to limit it because they feared the spread of diseases. However, Edward Jenner from England in 1796 decided to take the decision, and he actually studied vaccines. And what do we have now? We have vaccines for smallpox, for polio, ladies and gentlemen, for rabies, and this has actually increased the quality of life of many people. It has saved the lives of countless people, ladies and gentlemen. This has been a huge step forward. Stem cell research that the opposition seems so worried about in the moral sense. We see stem cell research also has been the right decision and has been a huge step forward. In the case of now, we can solve problems such as bone marrow cancer, we can solve diabetes, leukemia, nerve transplant. Paralyzed people will be able to walk if we move on with this field, if we stop the limits on this field, ladies and gentlemen. It will improve the quality of life for humanity immensely. The possibilities are vast, ladies and gentlemen. Humanity has already benefited hugely from scientific research. And to stop it now, because of moral quirks, ladies and gentlemen, we say this can never be justified. So we on the proposition believe that the government has no right whatsoever to limit the people's pursuit of knowledge, and this is not practical and beneficial to society either. It's on these grounds on which I'm very proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
8 minutes, 19 seconds.
Take the second proposition speaker for her speech. Now to continue the case for the opposition, I call upon Sneha Kumar.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sneha Kumar, the second speaker for the opposition. Before moving on to my positive case, I'd like to rebut some of the points brought up by the proposition today. The proposition came up here and they said that governments don't have the right to decide, don't have the right to limit scientific progress. Which is exactly why, ladies and gentlemen, we have organizations like the UNESCO, which my first speaker brought up in her model, who have the knowledge, who have the aim to promote world peace, and it will be them who decide what areas which should be limited. It will be them who decide which areas have more disadvantages than advantages, and then it will be the role of the governments to implement these limits. The job of the UNESCO is to decide what areas are potentially harmful for the society. The job of the UNESCO is to decide what areas have more disadvantages than advantages. And it is leaving the role of the government in this case is to place those limits and to implement those limits. And the reason why we're giving the government this job is because they have the authority and the infrastructure to do so. And therefore we are actually conceding with the motion. No, thank you, ma'am. And then they spoke about how we can't trust governments or even international bodies in some cases because they do often make wrong decisions. I find it really ironic that they're not able to trust governments and international bodies, but at the same time they're willing to trust any kind of uncontrolled research that could be done by some kind of scientist. No, thank you, sir. There have been several cases of uncontrolled research or where scientists have done certain things that have threatened world peace. Take for example Dr. Khan, Dr. Khan from Pakistan, who actually sold centrifugal devices to North Korea, which allowed them to break the nuclear proliferation treaty and create nuclear weapons. They failed to address the problem as to what could happen. No, thank you, ma'am. As to what could happen if this technology, if uncontrolled research could fall into the hands of the wrong people, as it did in the case of Dr. Khan. And then they came about and said that we are actually harming people by limiting what they should learn. But ladies and gentlemen, the job of the government is to protect the people. The job of the government is to weigh out the costs and the benefits. And yes, sir.
That is the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, that within the research procedures and the application procedures, we have regulations and licenses that the scientists have to stick to in order to account for a safety process.
Yes, sir, but we need more restrictions, and that's why we need the UNESCO. We need the UNESCO because there are a lot of areas, and there are a lot of areas of research. There are a lot of areas that are still potentially harmful, which are not. And no, thank you, ma'am. Which are very potentially harmful, such as nuclear proliferation, gene mapping, such as stem cell research, and all of these areas need limitations, which is why we have a model. No, thank you, ma'am. And then they spoke about how nuclear technology has its benefits and how it's a major source of energy for countries such as France. But we as a opposition are not denying the benefits of nuclear technology. All that we are saying is that we need limitations of this nuclear technology in order to prevent nuclear weapons proliferation. No, thank you. No, thank you, sir. We are not denying that there are benefits of nuclear technology, but there needs to be limitations placed. No, thank you, ma'am. No, thank you, sir. There needs to be limitations to protect the harms caused by it. Moving on to my positive case, I will be talking to you about the role of the government. Ladies and gentlemen, the role of the government is to protect its citizens and the greater good of society. Irrespective of what the short-term advantages of technology could be, we need to think about the long-term repercussions that this technology can cause. Increased technological advancement and research could cause detrimental effects to society, and that's exactly what we need to prevent, ladies and gentlemen. We need to think about the long term. The purpose of technology is to benefit people and to aid them. And once this research and this technology has more disadvantages than advantages, then limitations and restrictions need to be placed. Because yes, ma'am.
Now, we have proven to you already how vaccines was first regarded as disadvantaged, but later proved to be beneficial to mankind as a whole. How can you rebut that these vaccines do not deserve to survive scientific inquiry?
Yes, ma'am. Vaccines were seen as bad previously, but those decisions were taken by the government. We're not leaving the government to decide what is bad and what is good. We're leaving that to the UNESCO. We're leaving that job to the UNESCO to decide what areas need to be limited. And we're trusting the UNESCO with this because they have the research. They are the scientific body who have the knowledge to decide what areas are more beneficial. No, thank you, ma'am. No, thank you, sir. Which are more beneficial to society. And the progression of certain kinds of research can actually be detrimental to society. For example, gene mapping. Progression of gene mapping, and in the future it can allow you to. No, thank you, sir. It can possibly allow you to see how long a person can live, and this can have detrimental effects because, like my first speaker pointed out, psychologically it can affect the social life of the person, and it can also have. No, thank you, ma'am. can also have economic effects, because insurance companies rely on this uncertainty, and once people come to know how long they live, it will just lead to a great loss and the backbone on which insurance companies grow on, and it could just lead to closure of insurance companies. Moreover, there are various moral and ethical values that need to be protected by the state, and no, thank you, ma'am. There are several areas of science which interfere with the laws of nature. For example, certain kinds of cloning which interfere with the laws of nature. If we reach a stage where we can actually duplicate and clone a whole human being, then it will almost be like humans are playing God. They are interfering with the laws of nature. They are acting as a creator when it's actually God who is actually seen as a creator. They are interfering with the balance of nature. And it is these ethical values and moral values that need to be protected by the state, because that is what their role is. No, thank you, sir. There's also the problem of stem cell research which comes here, and it goes on to show how people can actually play God and interfere with the laws of nature. And over here, as for the moral values, there's a case of designer babies. Here again, the moral values within society needs to be protected, because if we allow science to just progress, then we can have people coming up and claiming that they want babies with blue eyes and blonde hair, or any shape or way as they want, and it can lead to people being superficial, and we need to protect certain moral values, and that's why the state needs to step in, the UNESCO needs to step in order to limit these areas from being researched, because they certainly have more disadvantages than advantages. Moreover, we as a society could become increasingly dependent on technology. Increasing research in certain areas could even lead to installation of memory chips into people, and this is why, and this can lead to no differentiation between people. There are reasons why someone is ranked the first in a class and someone is ranked the 10th in a class. But if we actually have increasing research into technology, we can have a day when there could be no differentiation between one person in a class and another person in the class. The reason why we have differentiation today, ladies and gentlemen, is because of the mental capacity of different people. And this mental capacity will have no reason to exist because of increasing dependence on technology and the overriding of technology over human capability, ladies and gentlemen. To sum up what have I told you today, I've rebutted some of the points brought up by the proposition, and I've told you how it will be the UNESCO who decides what areas should be limited, and it will be the government who will implement these limitations. I've then gone on to tell you about the role of the government. I've told you about why certain areas of research that need to be limited in order to protect society. So certain areas need to be limited because they clearly, in the long term, have more disadvantages than advantages. And it's for these reasons we as a opposition believe this case must fall. Thank you.
8 minutes, 2 seconds.
Thank the second opposition speaker for her speech. And now to continue the case for the proposition, I call upon Won-Jun Jang.
Ladies and gentlemen, what is today's issue? What is the issue that we have on the floor today? It is about whether government should have the right to restrict the research itself, not the procedures within the research, not the procedure of application, but whether governments should have the right to restrict people from even having the availability to research. And we on the proposition side today, Team Korea, has done two things. My first speaker, Seo proved to you today, ladies and gentlemen, that the government does not have the right to limit the pursuit of scientific knowledge. The second speaker on my side, ladies and gentlemen, proved that doing so would only hamper the progress of society, which we didn't have any rebuttal from the opposition side of the House today. Now, taking into account these arguments and the arguments of the opposition side, Team Kuwait, I'm going to do two things in today's debate. I'm going to pose to you two questions that we have to answer, two critical ones, and show to you how each side answered each question. So what are these questions, ladies and gentlemen? These are, first, what is the role of government? Second, is it right to place limits on areas of research? Let's go to the first issue and first analyze how the opposition answered this question. So what is the role of governments? From the moment they initiated their case, ladies and gentlemen, by having UNESCO as the actor, we say they, in principle, agree with us on the fact that governments do not have the capability and the right to do so. And through their actor, UNESCO, ladies and gentlemen, they have simply asserted the fact that yes, governments need international organizations to guide them. So ladies and gentlemen, on the first level, they have agreed with us that governments should not and cannot enact this value. So let's go on and assess their actor, UNESCO, and how it doesn't have the right to guide countries in these cases. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we argue that UNESCO is an international body, and it isn't a body that has the power to dictate what is good and what is bad in its member nations, ladies and gentlemen. In its mandate, it doesn't have a mechanism with which it can force certain dogma in countries. Moreover, ladies and gentlemen, as we noticed, UNESCO is an international body. What this means, ladies and gentlemen, is that it deals with various morals over the world, various values that different cultures uphold. And ladies and gentlemen, when it is in this international situation, we say that it can't dictate controversial opinions, especially those of ethical issues that deals with moral values and religious values, ladies and gentlemen. Ethical values that are abstract morals that differ from person to person. So ladies and gentlemen, we say, whether it be the governments, the UNESCO, they have no legitimacy and no justification to enact their value, ladies and gentlemen. So we say, let us research, let the scientists research, and let's have regulations in application procedure, just in case we see some detriments. No, thank you. So let's go on over to the side of Team Korea today, and assess how we answered these questions. We said that the government should allow the pursuit of knowledge so that the society can mature further on from that of today. My first speaker say, ladies and gentlemen, proved to you that the government has no right simply because it is a minority of society deciding for the majority of the people, and it doesn't have the right to do so, especially regarding controversial issues, ladies and gentlemen. So what can it do? And what should it do? What is the role of governments, ladies and gentlemen? The role of governments is to regulate the procedure of all the research, the procedure of application, how we apply certain inventions, how we apply certain technology into the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we say this is the role of governments. And ladies and gentlemen, having proved to you how each side answered this question, we can simply conclude that the role of governments is not to restrict the research itself. Let's go on to the second question, ladies and gentlemen. Is it right to place limits on areas of research? Now, we've heard a simplistic analysis from the opposition side of the House, ladies and gentlemen, indicating how there are unethical matters and dangerous matters. And in order to rebut this, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to deal with the principle of each of these matters and attack the examples that they illustrated to you. Let's go over to the principles. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is an unethical matter? As I have said, ethics is not absolute. It's not empirical, it's an abstract moral that differs from people to people. Especially because, ladies and gentlemen, these ethical issues, these morals that we have, are influenced by our moral and religious values. Ladies and gentlemen, as a result, we find it wrong to dictate that certain ethical problem is right or wrong. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, there you have the assumption that the government, that the UNESCO will have the capability, ladies and gentlemen, to always act in the right way and assess what is good and what is bad for the society, ladies and gentlemen. And on the last level, even if we are to say, just wait a minute, even if we are to say it is so bad that certain research is going to have detrimental effects, we have regulations and license procedures built within application. Don't you agree, ma'am? Ladies and gentlemen, even if it's a scientific organization, they have to deal with the fact that it is an international body and it can't dictate morals for the international world, ladies and gentlemen. Countries over the world, cultures over the world have different norms, have different values, and we can't really dictate what is right or wrong. Now, having dealt with this, the principle of unethical matters, let's deal with the principle of how dangerous matters can occur in research. Now, ladies and gentlemen, even if we are to say that there are areas of potential danger, we have laws, regulations, and mandates within research institutions that demand scientists follow safety procedures. There are laws, licenses that demand safety within these research institutions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as a result, we find no need for the government to curb the right of freedom to pursue our knowledge. And then, because we have a built-in structure in the status quo, ladies and gentlemen, where we can surely deter any detriments from happening. Well, thank you, ma'am. Now, having dealt with the principle of this matter, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to deal with each and every example that they brought up. Now, they first brought up this example of nuclear weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, the proliferation of nuclear weapons and the research of nuclear weapons, ladies and gentlemen, we say is a totally different matter. Even if we are to assume that research in nuclear weapons is going to be inherently detrimental, we say we have treaties, international treaties like non-proliferation treaty in the world, ladies and gentlemen, that take care of the application, that our society remain safe. Let's take the example of genetic mapping. Ladies and gentlemen, genetic mapping is the only solution to inherited disease. It's the only viable method that we have in curing inherited disease, ladies and gentlemen. We say this is not detrimental at all. Their issue of stem cells, ladies and gentlemen, is not unethical, ladies and gentlemen, because cells, having research based on stem cells, we use cells from bone marrows, not from embryos in the status quo. So we say there is no matter of whether it's ethical or not ethical. And we on the government, ladies and gentlemen, simply answer this question by, we have the pursuit of science, and which has brought huge progress. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the criteria, this is the value with which you have to judge this debate, and this value will tell you that Team Korea has certainly won this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank the third proposition speaker for his speech. Now to continue the case for the opposition, I call upon Solon Sharma.
Good afternoon, everyone. I, as the third speaker of the opposition, will give you a detailed rebuttal of the proposition's case under two main headings. Number one is the role of the state, and number two is hampering scientific research as brought up by the proposition today. The motion today is about limiting the government should place limits on areas of scientific research. Certain areas, as my first speaker outlined in our team line, which are detrimental, which definitely have more disadvantages than advantages in future. We want to limit scientific research into these specific areas of science, ladies and gentlemen. Now, under the role of state, the proposition has come up here and accused us of not abiding by the motion. Let's talk about the international organization. They say that government, according to our model, governments are not placing the limits. Ladies and gentlemen, when you have an international organization, the members of that organization belong to certain country or the others. Every member represents a government. They're people from different countries who, no thank you sir. They're people from different countries who come together representing various governments around the world to make an international body. These are still people of the government, ladies and gentlemen. These are still scientists, no thank you sir. These are still scientists who are sent by the government. They represent various governments around the world who have come together to make an international organization. The reason we need to do this on an international basis is because different countries have different priorities, and to make a uniformity about what areas of research are actually detrimental or not, to go in, no thank you sir, to go into the minor technological details to determine which technology is detrimental, which technology would definitely have more disadvantages than advantages. We need an international body, and that international body comprises of various members of different governments, ladies and gentlemen. We're still having, we're not taking away the role of the government from this motion. All the governments around the world are coming together, working together to solve this problem. The problems outlined by my first speaker, the problems of threat to society, the problems of threat to international peace, by technologies such as research into nuclear fusion, by technologies such as gene mapping, first and second speaker. These problems have not been addressed by any of the proposition speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, when it is still the governments who are placing these limits, because only the governments have the authority and the infrastructure to place these limits. They are the only ones who can implement them and make sure that the implementation is done on the basic ground. They came up here and said, gave us an example in a moment, sir. Gave us an example of the medieval century. Ladies and gentlemen, we're living in the 21st century. We are no longer going to make a decision based on religious beliefs. When there are scientists from all around the world coming together to make decisions, it will be done on basis of technology and not religious beliefs, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, sir.
Prove to us that whether it be the governments or international organizations...
Thank you, sir. As I said, these are the governments who are working on an international basis because we need uniformity. As outlined by my first speaker, we want them to work internationally because we want uniformity. You cannot have certain areas of research banned in certain countries and not the others, because then some countries will have advantage over others. We need to do this on an international basis. It's because uniformity is extremely significant in matters such, because scientific research can lead to technologies that are a threat to international peace and security. And to place limits on these, we need uniformity on an international level. The only way to do so is to set up an international organization. And as I said, international organizations are no different from governments. They are basically representations of various governments coming together on an international level. Well, thank you, ma'am. Also, what we are not allowing is extremist governments such as Iran and Hamas to influence scientific research problems. We have an international community. That's why we cannot let. This is how we're preventing extremist leaders in countries into taking decisions or controlling scientific research. That way, no, thank you, sir. That way, this will not be done on basis of religion, but on basis of technology. The proposition team here came up and said that governments should control application of technologies, allow them to research. Ladies and gentlemen, once something potentially harmful has been built, controlling the application is impractical and more unfeasible than placing limits on the scientific research. If we prevent research that is obviously potentially harmful, then we're preventing the creation of, thank you, ma'am. We are preventing the creation of something that's harming society or international peace, ladies and gentlemen. If we have something built, to prevent the application, to prevent it from going into wrong hands is much more difficult. No, thank you, sir. As we came up with the example of the scientist in Pakistan who stole the centrifuge devices of North Korea, they allowed this research to take place. Once the devices were in the hands of the scientist, he could sell it to the wrong people who use it for the wrong purpose. Once something has been built, we cannot control the distribution of that very equipment. Coming to my second point is hampering of scientific research. The proposition came up here and said that people's rights are being taken away. We fail to understand how we're taking people's rights. We are preventing future invention of certain devices or techniques that will be potentially harmful. When you take away rights, you take away something that people already have. If people don't have something, how does taking it away from them actually take away rights? Yes, sir.
We've proved to you, ladies and gentlemen, that there are already regulations and licenses.
Thank you, sir. This is exactly where the proposition have agreed with us. They think that technologies that are detrimental should be placed under legislation. These legislations are in place and they should abide by them. They have agreed with us that research that leads to detrimental effect should be placed under legislation, should be limited, and should not be allowed to happen. This is exactly what we are talking about, ladies and gentlemen. The proposition is completely agreed with this. They say that legislation is important, and since we have legislations about what is going on certain scientific research that a particular country thinks is detrimental to society or international peace, they should be stopped. This is what we are doing. We're stopping research that is detrimental. Only we want to do it on an international basis because we cannot have a country having an advantage over another. No, thank you, ma'am. We need an international organization because there's certain technologies that are obviously detrimental, ladies and gentlemen. Proposition has come up here and said that science has benefited us all and it improves the way of life. We fail to understand how do hydrogen bombs or gene mapping or computer hacking technologies improve the quality of life, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking about technologies that are so obviously hampering, are potentially going to cause a threat to society and international peace. We're talking about technologies that are still going on. They said that this is not a problem because they're already under legislation. But we still have research going on into nuclear fusion. We still have research going on into gene mapping, which can pose a threat, ladies and gentlemen. As my speakers already said, when a person knows how long they're going to live, or their lifespan has been predicted, it can have a psychological impact. They can become non-functional for the rest of their life. The whole concept of life insurance is just goes out the window. These regulations need to be tightened. These regulations need to be looked into. The technological details have to be examined. The only way to do it is when all the great minds around the world come together and identify the areas of research that are potentially harmful. And it is only the governments who can implement this, because governments around the world are the only ones who can make sure that the implementation is actually carried out on the domestic level. It becomes the role of the government to protect their citizens from something that's potentially harmful, something that's ethically or morally wrong, or something that is disadvantageous or threatens their security. We believe it is the real role of the state to protect their citizens from anything that is a threat, and that is why we believe this motion must fall. Thank you.
8 minutes and 7 seconds.
I thank the third opposition speaker for her speech. We will now move on to the team's 4-minute concluding reply speeches. The opposition team will deliver their reply speech first. There are no points of information during reply speeches. To deliver the opposition's reply speech, I call upon Monisha Kumar.
Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. I will be doing the summation on behalf of the opposition. On behalf of the opposition, this debate falls into 3 main areas of clash. Firstly, the areas of research. Secondly, the role of the government. And thirdly, the solution that we propose today. The first point, the actual areas of research. What the proposition have done today is constantly focused on medical issues throughout their first 2 speakers and autopsies conducted. What the opposition, what we say is while there are beneficial effects, there are certain detrimental effects, and in these issues, the government does have to limit the research to prevent the detrimental effect of these issues, which have both psychological and physical effect in case of bombs. They need limitations. And we also fail to understand why the proposition have never really addressed how to solve the problems brought up today. The nuclear bombs that are being caused due to having no limitations, are they willing to go through the actual damage just for the chance possibility where there are obvious detrimental effects of certain factors? I believe that these forms of research have to be curbed, have to be curtailed, so that for the greater good of society, so that their harm does not come so much. They do not have so much of a harm on society. These detrimental factors have to indeed be limited. Moving on to my second point, the role of the government. The proposition have come up here today and said that the government cannot regulate. They actually forgot about, they should not regulate, and they should actually take it in the application factor. But they completely forgot about the fact that in their case, when you have no limitations, they leave it in the hands of the scientists, of just people within the country. Would you rather have the government who's actually in charge of the country, who's able to reach out to all the people, or just random people, random scientists within the country being able to make their own decisions without any limitations on them, and who might, like Dr. Khan, as we stated, sell their plans if there's no government role, no government restriction within the country? Then finally, the last and major point, the solution. The opposition today, we have stated a solution that the government will implement. The proposition have constantly come up here and mentioned, how can the government do this? The government does not have the right. The government does not have the knowledge. Well, what we are stating, this is why we are using the UNESCO, because it is a scientific body and because the UN the UNESCO is a part of the UN, which is a group of all these governments, which brings together all these governments to ensure that most of their interests are met and to prevent certain rogue nations, rogue countries from misusing the fact that there should be no limitations. We need a certain uniformity which will be provided by the distinctive lines that the UNESCO, which is comprised of scientists, which because it is scientific, will be able to draw because they focus on these particular details. And the governments actually who have the authority to implement these decisions will be the ones who are implementing these decisions within the country. The proposition also came up here and spoke about there already being legislations. Well, as